It can only be attributable to human error.
He meddled in things that you people. He meddled in things. He meddled in things.
Where will we go next? Just phantom from another time.
No one, Mr. Mulder.
That's it, man. Game over, man. Game over.
That is one big pile of shit.
Hi, I'm Alex and Eli.
I'm Eli Watson.
I'm Karac St. Laurent.
And you're listening to
Cryptid.
Campfire.
Whoa.
Tales.
Yes. Today, hello Patreon listeners. Today we are joined by a guest on the show, Karac St. Laurent of Crash Course Cryptozoology. He's actually been on the show before, like once or twice, depending on how you want to count it. He was on the Future of Champ episode, and I can't remember the name of the other episode that we did, but it's up, and we recorded it live in New Hampshire in front of an actual campfire, and I'm glad to have Karac back on the show in a different role. You know, usually our guests are just purely interviews. Today, Karac is actually going to be showing up, providing some research for today's topic.
Yes, indeed. Today we're going to be discussing the Ropen.
Oh, yeah. So what is a Ropen? What does a Ropen look like?
Well, a Ropen essentially matches the look of a at least bird-like flying animal. There's definitely some contention over whether or not the animals, if they exist, are actually birds, or as some sightings seem to suggest, flying reptiles similar to pterosaurs. More often than not, instead of actually being seen as that, though, they're witnessed as these kind of light anomalies in the sky that many attribute to bioluminescence.
Mm-hmm. Which is pretty interesting. Hold on, I'm trying to find. I have a description here provided by a missionary to Papua New Guinea, and I can't find his name. I only wrote his last name down. Why?
Well, what's his last name?
Bloom?
His first name was most likely Orlando.
Orlando.
The missionary Orlando Bloom.
Or maybe it was Judy.
Judy Bloom. Oh my.
Are you there, Ropen? It's me.
Jim Bloom,
Jim
missionary
Bloom.
in
Right.
Papua New Guinea. And at the time that this description was taken down, he had opened, I think, what was it, 52 churches in Papua New Guinea? Guy was busy over there and basically lived over there.
Yeah, that guy was dropping churches left and right like they're going out of style.
Yeah, oh yeah. So he describes that the Ropen is seen in Papua New Guinea, Umboy Island, and New Britain Island. Which, funny enough, New Britain Island has another island to the north, and they call it New Ireland.
That's funny.
Anyways, Ropens have a wingspan of about 10 to 20 feet. They have bat-like wings, long body, tail with a flange, pelican-like bill, and a comb on the back of the head. Bloom believed there to be two kinds. There was the dark-colored with dark gray or dark blue spots, and the darker ones have a reputation of killing natives. And then there's the other kind, which is tan brown with dark spots.
Interesting.
And this is the most interesting part. I'm sorry. Karac, you brought up the bioluminescence. And he says, Jim Bloom says that the bioluminescence may relate to secretions that drip from the creatures as they fly. And the secretions are said to burn human skin.
Whoa.
That's interesting. I've
And,
never heard of it before.
Right? Some parts of Pacific, some parts of Papua New Guinea. I don't know why I want to say the Pacific New Guinea, but
It's the Southwest Pacific, I guess.
yeah, I guess, and I have it written down as PNG in my notes, so I just like my brain's like Pacific New Guinea, but it's so some parts of Papua New Guinea it is worshipped, and in other parts people don't want it disturbed, and in still other parts people are merely curious about it.
That is really interesting, and it kind of brings up this really kind of immediately interesting point, I think, which is that this obviously this guy who writes down these descriptions was a missionary, and there's kind of a lot of controversy around the subject of not just the Ropen, but of dinosaur sightings when it comes to people who are creationist.
Sure.
What's interesting though is that there is kind of this idea floating around that maybe the Ropen's been fabricated by that, but as we've kind of compared, even though it's a bit hard to decide because the tribes that have different mythologies are in such close proximity to each other, so it makes the mythology kind of hard to read. There are different names for this thing across different tribes.
Sure. And
Yeah,
we'll
you
get into
mentioned.
that.
Yeah,
Um,
go ahead.
I did want to say this though. Jim Bloom, as you said, he's a missionary. His mission objective was to convert people to a different religion. He wasn't researching the Ropen at all. He
Right.
knew this. He knew all of this from experience and meeting people who talked about the Ropen. In fact, he witnessed the Ropen himself at one point in his life.
Whoa.
Yeah. So like it was kind of a thing when the person who conducted his interview was Jonathan Whitcomb, as we'll be probably discussing a lot during this episode. But like I said, his mission objective wasn't to, push this creationist agenda. He was just like, hey, look, there's these things that the natives have seen that I've seen myself. And this is what I know about it. And that's kind of the end of his involvement with it. But yeah, so I just want to talk a little bit about the location of where the Ropen lives. As we mentioned, Papua New Guinea, which is actually only half of the island of New Guinea. I didn't know if you knew that. So I think there's this whole island of New Guinea, and it's split in half. And the east side of that island is Papua New Guinea. On the west is Papua, which is
I
the
see.
easternmost province of Indonesia. So it's kind of split. I'm not sure the history about how it's split or whatnot. And then, of course, to the east of Papua New Guinea, you have Umboy Island, which is where a lot of investigations have happened. And then to the east of that, you have New Britain Island and New Ireland Islands as well.
Right.
Just to
So,
make things more confusing on the map.
yeah. So Papua New Guinea is actually one of the most culturally diverse countries in the world.
Yeah.
And it's also one of the most rural countries in the world. So only 13.25% of its people live in urban centers, as opposed to the United States, where 80.7% of the population lives in cities.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
Well,
So
I was gonna say, for reference, because I know we talk about on the show a lot, like different locations and all these amazing areas where these cryptids and these strange things are, and I've always heard of Papua New Guinea, and it's like, oh, that's I mean, it's got a nice roll off the tongue, Papua New Guinea. What a nice phrase. It's right above Australia for reference.
Oh yeah, there you go. I'm glad you said that.
Ooh, thank you. So. Australia, very diverse area, so a little island above it. Got even crazier things going on.
Well,
Right.
yeah, that and the geography of Papua New Guinea is pretty insane. It's this wonderful combination of mountainous and jungle.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, it's one of the least explored culturally and geographically countries in the world. It's there's numerous groups of uncontacted people, and it's believed that there's many undiscovered plants and animals in the deepest, like most unexplored parts. But like we were kind of hinting at, mythology-wise, and the difficulty of Papua New Guinea is that there's 151 known languages spoken there
Right.
Whoa.
among 8 million people. And let's see. So get this. All right, so this is going to get really technical for a second, but please bear with me. The area of Papua New Guinea is 178,000 square miles, with a population most recently 8.9 million.
Right.
The state of California, which is the closest in size to Papua New Guinea, is 163,000 square miles, and it has a population of 39 million people.
Whoa.
Wow.
So just imagine the state of California with 30 million people less.
Wow.
Sounds like heaven.
Yeah, right? Yeah, it's pretty nutso, but I mean, that's when we're talking about Papua New Guinea, it's actually a pretty big place, and there's not a whole lot of people there. So,
Yeah, right. Which of course lends itself to how much, room something has to grow pretty big out there. There's not a whole lot of human intrusion in the areas. It's not like it has to get smaller to accommodate a smaller habitat or anything.
right. Pretty interesting. So, where does this take us? Oh, wait, can I share some names for the Ropen that I found?
Yes, of course.
You have to.
Yes.
Now.
So, obviously we have Ropen, which
Hmm.
in some tribes, Ropen just means bird.
Yes, right.
So sometimes it doesn't always refer to the pterosaur-like creature.
Hmm.
We have the duwas,
Right.
which is sometimes, I guess, on the internet, supposed to be a different species or it's different from the Ropen, but it's not. It's actually just a different language for the same thing. There's the Seklo Bali, the the Kundua, Indava, Kor, Wawanar. Those are all different, I should say.
Right.
Those are some of the ones I got, but I'm imagining there's probably 151 different ways to say Ropen.
Most, and it's so interesting that you bring up the point that Ropen can translate to bird. In so many of the eyewitness interviews that you see, people refer to it as the bird or the big bird.
Mm,
And of course, what's kind of interesting about that, along with, I was going to mention the missionary's description of this kind of pelican-like beak.
mm,
The idea of this, let's say it's a pterosaur-like animal that has bird-like feathers and has a kind of robust pelican-like beak, is something that matches more of what we now understand pterosaurs look like, as opposed to what we thought they looked like, 3-5 decades ago.
sure.
So
Or
that's
even like
interesting.
the like what they have in Jurassic Park. The pterosaurs, you think of them as, big leathery monsters, but they could have had feathers. They probably looked more like the pelican, especially because the way the jaw is and stuff, and the way it kind of.
Yeah, you see it in larger ones, especially like Quetzalcoatlus, for one thing.
Yeah.
It has this very massive but wide beak that looks a lot like a pelican's because it has almost that pouch-like bulge near the tip.
Mm-hmm.
Hmm. Very interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. And apparently they glow and have acidic secretions.
Dude, yeah.
I've not used that yet, but bioluminescence is an interesting one. That's definitely a very interesting factor.
Right. Which, okay, this got me thinking, right? The secretions, right? The secretion theory that it drips from them as they fly over. And the fact that Jim Bloom said that it can burn human skin is like, to me, it's like somebody out there must have been in the wrong place at the wrong time, had this bioluminescent goop fall on him, and it like burned through his hand or something.
Mm-hmm.
And no one knows, and no one cares.
Well, we never documented who it was, right?
And it's like, you have all these people showing up, and they're like, how did you get that hole in his hand? And he describes, some goop fell and burned right through my hand, and it came from the rope. And they're like, well, pterodactyls don't exist. They're extinct. And he's
Yeah,
like, then how do you
you
explain
big
this?
dummy.
Right. You know, I do have. That's interesting that you mentioned the secretion thing. There is one thing in the animal kingdom that reminds me greatly of that. Did you know that platypi glow under UV light?
Yeah, did they just discover that?
I don't know exactly how recent it is, but I assume it's a fairly recent discovery.
I saw a Facebook post about it recently.
Well,
Yeah.
it's attributed to the kind of oil that their skin secretes.
Mm-hmm.
Weird.
And obviously, the Ropen hasn't been purported to glow, or even, these light phenomenon haven't glowed under UV light all the time necessarily. But, that's a pretty similar kind of phenomenon. And I wonder if there's something going on with that.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that's pretty interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, totally.
Or going back to just real quick, because Eli, you mentioned, like there's a guy out there who got burned by some mysterious goop from the sky, and nobody's really talking about it.
Oh no.
Well,
Yeah.
if it's with a rope, and if it's centralized to Papua New Guinea, that's just a way of life. Towards it's like, oh, you go for a walk, and there's a chance you could just get burned by stuff falling out of the sky. Because it's like, oh, it's been here for as long as we've been growing up in Papua New Guinea. It's just what, you guys don't have acid fall from the sky randomly too?
That's kind of the most fascinating thing about hearing stories like this is whether or not they're even true. They're so deeply ingrained in native culture that the fact is that people are, at the very least, living with that kind of thing being a real fear. To them.
Yeah,
Yeah.
The
it
concern that
happens.
a Ropen can burn you with its sweat, like that's a real concern out there, and that's such an interesting cultural factor.
Yeah, it is. Wow. As we've been talking about, like Alex just said, it could be just the way of life, and as we'll see with a lot of the sightings, that seeing the Ropen is just kind of the way of life in Papua New Guinea. Um, Although it's rare, but it seems like everyone just kind of knows about it.
Mm.
It's In fact, I was reading a book last night and it brought up bears. How many people have seen bears in their real waking life? Probably not a whole lot. You
Mm.
know, I don't know. I've seen a bear like once or twice. I don't know about you, Alex, but
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, I've seen them at like a zoo.
yeah, outside of the
But
zoo and
yeah,
outside of TV, have you seen one out in the wild? And it's like
not that I can say. Yeah.
I have in Yosemite. I saw one. Um, and in Sequoia. So I've seen two, but like they were fleeting glimpses, and it's like it's something that we all know exists is a bear, and yet few people have encountered them in their wild habitat.
Mm-hmm.
So like I feel like it's almost the same thing with the Ropen is few people have seen the Ropen out there, but everyone who lives in Papua New Guinea knows that it's there.
Mm.
You know? So this brings us to I guess, the first Westerner who saw the Ropen, and she has my favorite name of all time, Evelyn Cheeseman.
Evelyn Cheese.
Yeah. Her middle
Cheese.
name was Mozzarella.
Evelyn Mozzarella Cheeseman. So who wants to share this story?
Well, I just have
Go
the
ahead.
the cliff note. I was gonna say, if you want to take it away, Kara, because I just have like the date and her name and a little bit of who she was. If you want to expand
Go
upon
ahead. Go ahead with that.
it. Well, from what I could tell, she saw it, what, 1935 is what I got.
Mm-hmm.
And so to let everyone know, Evelyn Cheeseman, she's not just some random person who just was like, I'm gonna go on vacation and check out Papua New Guinea. She was a noted biologist and an entomologist, I believe,
Right.
which I think is the study of bugs.
Is it really?
Yeah,
Yes, indeed.
we got bugs in our cheese.
Yeah.
And
Ew, gross.
what a combo. Let's see. Oh, and she actually saw, so she mentions them in her book, The Two Roads to Papa, published in 1935.
Hmm.
And she described baffling lights that lasted about 4 or 5 seconds. And I guess that's the phenomenon that people attribute to Ropen. We were talking
Right.
about the glow. Is that all? That's all I have is that
That's
she experienced the
essentially
lights.
that's
Yeah.
basically it. Yeah, her focus was mostly on the lights. I don't know if we have her thoughts on the whole pterosaur idea, I know that there is one source that said kind of vaguely that she quote unquote saw a Ropen, and I don't know if those are her exact words. Obviously, I'm not sure what the quote in her writing say. She definitely at one point believed to have witnessed and studied Ropen lights, and her only published conclusion that I know of was that she didn't think they were man-made.
Mm-hmm.
What she thought was making them is kind of, I don't think that's recorded.
Because she didn't know. So,
Probably.
well, here it is. So she actually asked the natives about what those lights were, and they refused to say anything about it. So I don't even know if she was introduced to the concept of the Ropen because the natives didn't want to talk about it.
Right.
And it's interesting that she's an entomologist, because I guess I didn't know that was the study of bugs. But a lot of people will try to attribute this sighting to fireflies.
You're right.
Mhm.
Right.
Right? And there's a number of things that's like wrong with that, obviously, because I have this quote here from Whitcomb's book, Searching for Ropens and Finding God. But in the light of the following day, she stood on the veranda exactly where she had stood at night, with a post showing her where the lights had been, close to the top of a particular mountain ridge about 3 miles away. She saw they'd been strung out over 2 to 3 miles on a horizontal line above the tree canopy. So I would imagine that even an entomologist would be hard-pressed to see some fireflies from 3 miles away.
Yeah.
Or mistake fireflies that were close for being 3 miles away, for that matter.
Exactly.
Right.
And obviously the 4 to 5 second, I'm not an expert on fireflies. I'm not sure if they go out and in.
They pulse essentially. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
It can last for a few seconds. It usually doesn't last for, I think, as long as 5 seconds, but obviously 5 seconds being such a short time frame, can feel like 2 or feel like 10. So
Yeah.
I think definitely the size relativity is kind of what gets into play there. This is somebody who studied insects for a living, and doing that surely had an idea of depth perception when looking out for insects. So it doesn't seem logical that she would see fireflies on a tropical, area, no less, which surely has, some form of glowing bug, and would immediately jump not to glowing insects, but to giant lights in the sky strung out over 3 miles. It doesn't seem like a thing that she would jump to.
Mm-hmm.
And she was well respected in her field as well, so she was no joke.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's the thing is, with the article I found, they're like, oh, she's not just somebody off the street. Like she was like respected. So when she came out, it was like, hey, I found these like weird things. They're like, oh, that
Right.
is something important.
Yeah, that's kind of I would say the most interesting thing about the Cheeseman testimony is, for one thing, she analyzes it like how you'd expect a professional to analyze it. She doesn't go right to pterodactyl. She doesn't go right to, giant bug or something like that. She says, hey, I don't know what this was, but I don't think people were making them. And that's about as much as you can empirically say in that kind of situation. So she wasn't jumping to anything, I wouldn't say. It's also interesting to note that she wasn't a creationist. She was a very scientifically, I suppose you could say, somewhat atheistic minded person. So, again, kind of breaks a bit of the mold of the whole narrative that this is something that was dreamt up by creationists. It's probably been added to by creationists, but certainly not created, little joke there, by them.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I guess that takes us to the bulk of this, right? Which is what Jonathan David Whitcomb,
Jonathan
the
David
meat and
Whitcomb
potatoes.
himself.
The reason why they say it's dreamt up by creationists is this man is a creationist. He has some things to say about evolutionary theory and whatnot.
Well, I guess before we go, what is creationism? I guess we should not say what that is, so people
Oh,
at
sure.
home know what we're talking about.
I suppose it's a very broad umbrella term in some senses, but it's to some extent kind of just the act of being either mono or polytheistic. Um, Someone who's a creationist holds the belief or has come to the conclusion that there is a deity like force or deity like forces at play in the inception of the universe and therefore all its components.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Right. I guess we should explain Paul Nation first, actually.
Yes, because he's kind of, I would even say, probably as important as Whitcomb is to the history of the Ropen right now.
Yeah, so if you want to go ahead on Paul Nation, because I don't have too much on him.
Sure. I'm not exactly sure how much exists on Pollination Online. Maybe there's more digging required, but as far as I could find, he's a U.S. citizen. He's from Texas, I think,
Mm-hmm.
and he was vacationing in Papua New Guinea, or maybe he was there for work. I'm not sure. And I think this was what like you said, late '90s, early 2000s, something like that. And he got on film these two white lights that were in the sky. Um, this kind of very standard Ropen sighting, so to speak. But what's interesting is it's one of the only pieces of cryptozoological footage that has actually been examined by real professionals. Whitcomb and Nation had this taken to a physicist at oh I don't think it was a Texas University. I think it was something more northern, but somebody who obviously dabbled in a science that has a lot to deal with how light interacts with the physical world, and they got some pretty interesting conclusions from that person. They had a very thorough study of Paul Nation's footage, so that's kind of why Paul is significant.
Yeah.
Mm.
In 2006, he got even more footage. I know in the late 90s, he went around Papua New Guinea filming interviews.
Mm.
In fact, he interviewed Jim Bloom at one point.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Uh, and so Jim Bloom actually shared a couple of stories with Paul Nation about things that he had been told. So they're like secondhand reports. So
Mm.
natives had told Jim Bloom about some of the things they had seen, and Jim Bloom ended up telling Paul Nation. And so in one story, uh, in fact, I think actually Paul Nation interviewed this man as well, and there's a picture of him in Whitcomb's book of
Mm.
this man. And actually, I kind of like that. I kind of like seeing what the witness looks like. I
Mm-hmm.
don't know.
Yeah.
It's kind of cool. So it was kind of cool hearing this story or reading this story and then being able to see a picture of what this guy looks like. And
Mm.
so he said that there was a ropen glowing brightly and it approached a village after a burial. And this was a long time ago before wood coffins were a thing in Papua New Guinea. And so they would wrap people up in like giant leaves and then place them in the ground.
That's
And so
interesting.
the Ropen, we're talking about this guy was old in the early 1990s. So
Mm.
it's probably like 1920 that this is happening, right?
Right.
Um, because he describes that he was a little boy at the time. So
Mm.
Boy,
I
you have it.
should have said that. So yeah, he was a kid, but he said that he saw the Ropen dig up the body and take it away.
Whoa.
Yeah, so after they buried this person, the Ropen arrived in the village glowing and unburied the corpse and flew away with it. Um,
Ooh-wee, what a sight.
yeah, he said that the fingers and the hair, which is interesting, were long and that it looked shiny. Or it looked skinny. Whoops, I can't read my own writing. Um, Paul Nation also interviewed a man named Darius who lived on Malai Island, who told him a story about a group of men who were on a fishing trip, had found a sleeping ropen and tied it up. But when it awoke, it broke free and flew away.
That's
And yes. And some natives tried to explain a little bit about what the Ropen is to them, to Paul Nation, saying that there was a spiritual aspect to the Ropen. And they said it's like a man in that it has a flesh and blood body, but it's also spiritual. It's still somewhat like a spirit.
Hmm.
Um, so I would assume this is not assume, but like maybe you can liken this to like Native Americans and how they viewed
Hmm.
coyotes, right? It's like,
Yes, absolutely. Any animal for that matter. Yeah.
right. It's like coyotes are obviously very real and we know they exist, but at the same time, they held a spiritual place as tricksters in a lot of Native American cultures. So,
Or you're doing a little callback to when we talked about fox spirits.
exactly, yeah.
Because in like Chinese and Japanese mythology, they're like, well, foxes are real, we know, but also they can grow extra tails and be like spiritual creatures as well.
And fly around. What was
Yeah,
the Jasmine shared that story, right? Where they were just flying?
I think so, right?
Yeah, and then you said that that their tails spin like propellers and
Oh shit.
Yeah, yeah, just like Tails from Sonic. And then the fox spirits raise so many questions because they're like, well, once you live 1,000 years, you turn gold and you're sent into heaven in front of everyone. Oh dang.
Yeah, it's wild. Those fox spirits are wild, man. Let's see. Hold on. I have to share page 20.
Page 20, you say? The legendary page 20.
The page left out of most other
Oh,
reading.
The page
yes.
didn't want you to read.
This is
Yeah.
another interesting one. That might offer some clues about the behavior of the Ropen. So this is a group of hunters had cut open and hung up a game animal, and they encountered a Ropen clinging to a tree trunk. Apparently, it had followed the smell. They said the intruder was about 4 feet tall with hair on its back. Two of the men later demonstrated to the interviewers how the creature held itself in an upright posture, like a boy climbing a coconut tree, as it turned its head to look down at them.
Mm.
So, another thing, I guess we should discuss this now, but uh, another native of Papua New Guinea is the flying fox. We were just talking about flying foxes'
Yes.
spirits, but the flying fox is the fruit bat, which I believe is the largest bat in the world,
Mhm.
Yeah,
with a
it's
wingspan up to 5
particularly in the
feet.
Philippines, they're growing rather large. Yeah.
Yeah. And in fact, Jonathan David Whitcomb talks about the first time he went to Papua New Guinea when he stayed in his hotel for the first night there. There was a tree outside his window, and hanging from the tree branch just outside his window was a flying fox. And it was just kind of looking at him, and it freaked him out because he was like, first of all, it's ginormous,
Mm.
but apparently they're kind of curious creatures also.
Mhm.
Um,
Right.
So, but like all bats, they hang upside down from trees. They don't cling to them like is what's just described.
Right. Right.
Um,
That's interesting.
right.
Hmm.
Yeah, I really want to see a flying fox. I really do.
The photographs are they're the kind of photo that you look at and you're like, I know that this is real, but it doesn't feel real. It's so
Mhm.
enormous. There are some that look
Right.
like they're the size of like they're 5 feet tall, which is incredible.
Yeah, they're huge, man.
It's incredible. They're the size of children.
Yeah, that's going back to the age-old rule of science. There's two types of every animal. There's
Mm.
your normal regular kind of animal, and
And
then
then
there's your mega variety.
I think, Carrick, for context, was it the Kraken episode, Alex?
Yeah.
Yeah. There was some French dude who said that there was the octopus and the mega octopus. And that was, and apparently he referred to squids as octopus as well and refused to call them squids for
So
whatever reason. So,
differentiate between octopi and squids.
no, but we kind of came up with the joke that there's always two kinds of an animal. There's the regular animal and then the mega animal.
The mega one
That's
that
funny.
is like 5 times the normal size.
Maybe that's like the Godzilla thing. Marine iguana is just the normal Godzilla. Godzilla is the mega marine iguana.
Oh yeah, which was caused by French radiation in the 90s once.
Exactly. Exactly. There you have it.
It's all the
Fr-
French. It's coming back.
French radiation?
Yeah, 'cause
It's
they-
a new kind of radiation. It's called French radiation. Yeah.
it's always
Oh,
smoking
boy.
a cigarette.
Giving you a dirty look at its eye.
Anyways, oh, another thing about the flying fox is that the natives of Papua New Guinea do differentiate between a flying fox and the
And a
ropen.
rope. They
Yeah.
know. Yeah.
Yeah, as you would expect as people who live on the island. Uh,
Well,
Yeah.
that's interesting. It kind of solidifies the whole like this is a bird or bird-like thing of some kind if it exists, obviously.
mhm.
Um, we seem to be able to deduce that there is some kind of light phenomenon going on,
Yeah,
which is kind of the justification, I think, for all the investigation. Um, it really is definitely, from a scientific perspective, very, what would you say? I guess you would say troubling to some extent that there just exists nothing for the pterodactyl or pterosaur-like animal angle or hypothesis, you could say, except for eyewitness testimony, which is kind of Jonathan Whitcomb's, the guy we're talking about, obviously, his area of expertise, you could say, was eyewitness
oh
testimony.
yes. Well, I'm glad you brought that up because I have an eyewitness testimony from 1944.
Oh, I know this one. Yes, this
Do
is
you?
very interesting. I think I do.
So this person reached out to Jonathan David Whitcomb via email and then later followed up with an in-person interview. And there's a picture of this man in the book,
He was a
the old guy.
World War II pilot, right?
hmm
Right, that's him.
And so I'm going to read some of this email and then explain some other things. But his name is, I think, Dwayne Hodgkinson.
That's him.
So this email was received in 2004. And it begins, in 1944, I was stationed in Finschhafen, New Guinea, with the U.S. military. While there, I made several trips into the surrounding native villages with a friend of mine and a native guide, provided by the Australian government. On this one particular trip, we had the wonderful opportunity to witness a pterodactyl take off from the ground and then circle back overhead and to the side, giving us a perfect side view which clearly showed the long beak and appendage protruding from the back of its head.
Hmm.
And then he says, in parentheses, just like the ones that Fuzzy used to ride in the comic strip Alley Oop. It was a big
Oh,
one.
hey.
It was a big one. I have a Piper Tri-Pacer airplane, wingspan of 29 feet, and it appeared to be about that size.
Hmm.
The frequency of its wing flaps was about 1 or 2 seconds. With each flap, we could hear a loud swish, swish, and the plants in the brush immediately beneath its path, or beneath its takeoff path, were deflected by the downrush of air. I have not told many people about this, as, of course, prehistoric creatures simply do not exist. So he later told Whitcomb more in the follow-up interviews. So apparently he was walking through this trail with a native guide, and he and his friend stopped in a clearing, and that's when they heard a crashing noise in the brush, and when they looked up, they saw on this hill that was right next to him, the creature just took off into the air.
Hmm.
So it was above them already. And they said that a wild pig, which had noticed the noise, ran downhill. um, Hodgkinson says he doesn't remember much about the tail because he was focusing on the head.
Hmm.
And he said that he described the creature as dark, the neck was long, and the head appendage was about half the head length.
Hmm.
He said that the mouth, or I guess the head crest and the beak were long and narrow, parallel to each other,
Hmm.
and in flight almost parallel to the neck, which will come up later. He said that he saw that the creature was running for several steps to get airborne, and that the tail was indeed a tail and not legs.
Hmm.
So we don't know much about the tail, I guess, from this report.
Interesting.
Yeah,
That's pretty wild.
Yeah. Yeah, that
indeed.
is. And World War II pilot, so someone who's obviously spent time identifying flying objects around him.
Oh, here we go.
Mhm.
I have a few more details. I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
The sighting occurred about noon. So this was like broad daylight. It was not dark at all. And they first assumed it was a bird, but when it circled and it was above them about 50 to 100 feet above them, it presented a perfect side view of itself. And it was obviously not a bird.
Wow.
He said that it was dark but not black, perhaps a dark brown. The feet were tucked up to the body. And he said that the head was similar to the length of the neck, so about 3 to 4 feet long. And he said that the tail was at least 10 to 15 feet long.
Whoa.
That's a very common description, that kind of weird longish tail, which is
Mhm.
definitely also a bit of a strange feature to describe because it doesn't seem like that would be very aerodynamic having that heavy tail.
Maybe it's not heavy.
Maybe it's not heavy.
Well,
You
that's
know,
what because they say what the Ropen has a long tail with like kind of a like
like
looks
a
like a
club.
like a shovel or a club at the end of
Yeah,
it.
usually, right.
Yeah,
That's maybe what it uses to like dig up the graves and steal the bodies.
Yeah, or it flies down over the villages and uses its tail to smash the buildings.
Yeah,
Hey,
that's what.
maybe these things do use them to fight. Who knows?
Yeah, it
Uh,
whips the tail and shoots the secretion everywhere.
Maybe that's where it comes from. Could be. That's so interesting that he says that they thought it was a bird.
Mm-hmm.
It almost is beginning to seem like, just statistically, from how many stories that we've been reading in preparation for this, obviously, that there's obviously a problem with dinosaur sightings in which often dinosaurs are described as very outdated ideas of what dinosaurs looked like.
Mm-hmm.
But with the Ropen, I've yet to hear one story that said it was definitely featherless. Every story either calls it a bird or said that it looked like a bird.
mm,
Mm-hmm.
That's the most interesting thing, is that everyone seems to describe this as, at least relatively, a scientifically accurate pterosaur type animal.
Mm-hmm. They always mention like hair or like feathers or
Yeah,
something
something
on it.
covering it, not just this leathery, scaly body or anything, which,
Mm-hmm.
especially for like a World War II pilot, you'd expect his typical image of a pterodactyl to be that Flintstone-like, outdated, leathery, scaly design.
Mm-hmm.
mm.
But here he is saying, no, I thought it was a bird at first. And if you
Yeah.
saw a bird that was featherless and had leathery skin, you wouldn't think bird when you first saw
Yeah,
it.
right. Yeah. Especially like if you have ever, I mean, you see like, you look at a turkey after it's, had its feathers off. Like they're definitely noticeable, weird looking when there's no
Right,
feathers on a bird.
right, exactly. Yeah,
Hmm.
that's very interesting. Hmm.
Well, I think we're really selling the timeshare idea in Papua New Guinea. It's a great place to go and visit. Wonderful
Want to get
location,
burned
great
by a giant
people.
pterodactyl?
Yeah,
Good,
pterodactyl shooting acid in the sky.
digging up graves all the time.
Yeah.
Well, see, that kind of brings us into, talking about this kind of compelling case for like, well, the Ropen's kind of a standout with saurian or, prehistoric reptile sightings because of the fact that it's actually described, let's say apart from the tail, which is a kind of aerodynamics issue, as a pretty accurate model of a pterosaur.
Mm.
The question, of course, then might be, well, if this is kind of a standout, why is there no standout evidence? And I think that kind of bringing together, Paul Nation's research and John Whitcomb's research and finishing the point about when they got Paul Nation's video analyzed. The paper is obviously a bit lengthy. You and I have both read it, I think, Eli, or at least read the important diagrams that were in it.
Sure.
And there was the study of like how the light seems to radiate from the center, what patterns radiating, which of the sectors of the light seem to radiate outwards more than the other ones, what levels of light are being given off. And what was fascinating was this physicist who had, no prior knowledge of the Ropen or of saurian sightings or anything like that, essentially said, these are not things that are small and close to the camera. These are large objects of some sort. They're not attached to anything. The light source is at least circular in nature, which could be a number of things if we're looking at a bioluminescent kind of animal.
Mhm.
And they're suspended, relatively speaking, in midair, and they're not caused by a device of any kind. It doesn't seem, because again, there's nothing that seems to connect the lights and their source to the ground. So they're suspended in the air, and they're radiating genuine light. It's not an edited video of any kind. So what is it that we're looking at then? That's kind of the question of the Ropen, I suppose. One thing that you and I talked about, Eli, was, let's hypothetically assume that we're looking at a pterosaur or pterosaur-like animal. Pterosaurs were kind of, I guess, in a funny way, you could say nature's first take on a bird. And we know that one thing that a lot of, especially tropical birds, develop is really interesting and just absolutely out of this world patterns on their feathers, things they can do with their feathers, displays they can put on. I suppose if gun to my head, if I had to assume that the Ropen was something that was an airborne animal, and I had to take a guess as to what the lights could be, and of course that's a very particular context to put that in, because they really could be anything at this point. Um, Perhaps we're seeing some kind of intimidation or mating display. It's interesting that the one report that describes seeing the Ropen glowing in person attached to the animal was during that grave digging report. If you're looking to get some food and there's a bunch of little animals around your food, you're going to want to look pretty big and mean if you want to get that food. And maybe the light is this animal, if it exists, way of saying, hey, back off. This is mine.
Yeah,
Could
definitely.
be.
Or maybe when they get hungry, like that engine light turns on, when you're out of gas, it's just like,
Engine light.
uh-oh, the pterodactyl's hungry. It's glowing. Everybody run.
Yeah, very interesting.
Yeah. I guess this brings us to probably the biggest sighting of the Ropen, 1994. It was the story of 7 boys. They went up this
Yes.
mountain. And when I say boys, I mean like teenagers. So they're like 7 teenage dudes. They went up this mountain to visit this lake called Lake Pung. And they were there for a few minutes, and then they described that there was a Ropen that was flying over the lake, and it scared them so much that they ran back down the mountain. And I think, if I remember correctly, Paul Nation first interviewed the person who talked the most. So it was the reason we know about this is because Gideon, which is one of the boys, was pretty vocal about it and willing to share his story, more so than the other boys who were there. And so I think Paul Nation interviewed Gideon in the mid 1990s, and Jonathan Whitcomb followed up with a different interview about, I think, exactly 10 years later in 2004, when he was there on Umboy Island. Which is funny because while they were on that island, members of Jonathan Whitcomb's crew witnessed flying lights that were pulsating 4 to 6 seconds in length.
That's interesting.
Yeah, it sounds a lot like Cheeseman's story.
Yeah, it does.
Right? But they said it was like a shapeless kind of, they couldn't really make out a shape of it. It was at night. So again, we don't really know. But let's see. So there's actually a video of Gideon that's online.
Was that on Whitcomb's channel? I think I've seen the interview.
Yeah, it's on his YouTube. And I found it through his website. He's got like pictures from his expedition, videos up on his website, but they're like uploaded to YouTube, so they're just linked.
Okay, got it.
Yeah, but so basically Gideon just describes going up this mountain and going up to Lake Pung, and it was in the middle of the day as well, similar to the World War II veteran sighting. And they stayed there for a couple of minutes before the Ropen appeared. Yeah, so it was one with a wingspan of about 22 feet. He says 7 meters. Um, he said, let's see, hold on. He said the wings were like bat-shaped. He said the tail, yeah, he said the tail was also 7 meters long. So just as long, just as big as his wingspan.
Whoa.
Interesting.
Yeah. He also said, Whitcomb asked if there was any feathers, if he had seen any feathers on it.
Hmm.
To which Gideon replied that he had not, that it didn't have feathers.
Interesting. Okay, so there we have one report with no feathers then. Huh.
Yeah. So then Whitcomb followed up, was like, so then was it just skin like the flying fox? To which Gideon nodded yes, it was just skin like that.
Hmm.
So a leathery look to it, I guess. Gideon said that its mouth was like a crocodile, which is obviously very different from the pelican style beak.
Yeah, and he knows what a bird looks like, obviously. So he would
Mhm.
say beak if he meant beak. That's interesting.
Yeah, it's interesting because he also didn't notice the back head appendage that's
Yeah, like
sometimes
no
reported.
crest.
But
Right.
as mentioned before, uh, if we're going off of what Dwayne Hodgkinson said, that it's parallel to the neck while flying, depending on the angle, you might not even be able to see
Right. That
the
would be a good.
separation.
Right.
Yeah.
Hmm.
And then he said once they saw it, they just left because they didn't want to hang around.
Yeah.
But
Fair enough.
yeah, so there was no mention about like a diamond shape at the end of the tail.
Hmm.
And in fact, what's the name? Gideon drew a depiction of the Ropen out. And that's kind of interesting. It's he just drew it in the sand. It's a very crude drawing, but Whitcomb has pictures of it on his website.
Okay.
Ooh.
Yeah, and it's also in a video, I think, as well.
I should
Um,
rewatch that. I must have misremembered it. Yeah.
yeah, I don't know. So Whitcomb also interviewed Wesley Coro, who was Gideon Coro's brother,
Hmm.
and also a another guy named Mesa. I
Hmm.
don't have it. Oh, Mesa Augustine, and they were all interviewed completely separately and said the same thing.
Huh.
But well, actually, Mesa asked. So, gosh, how do I say this? Whitcomb basically said that he forgot to ask Gideon about the tail,
Okay.
but he asked Mesa Augustine, who was one of the seven boys there, about the tail, and Mesa said that the tail had a diamond at the end of it,
Hmm. Interesting.
like a diamond shape. Obviously not a real diamond, but
Right.
uh, yeah. But they basically everything else was, you know, in line with the story. So uh, there's no details that were off. In fact, at one point, Whitcomb asked Mesa. He said, "You call this a ropen?" And he said, "Yes." And he said, "And the ropen's much bigger than a byung, which is flying fox in that language." And Mesa responded and said that it was too big to be a flying fox.
Hmm.
So I don't know, pretty interesting to me.
It is. And that kind of ignites 2 points, one of which being that even though we have a good deal of Ropen stories that suggest feathers or say feathers,
Hmm.
it still falls to that same thing to be wary of with story and sightings, which is that, well, we need to remember what our contemporary understanding of a saurian looked like. And maybe that opens the door for things like not pterosaur, but pterosaur-like animal, if they
Hmm.
do exist, or pterosaur-like bird, etc., etc. But what that kind of also segues into, in a way, is the discussions that we do have in the fields of paleontology about similar subjects. I posted recently an article in the Facebook group that I have about this kind of newly ignited debate on whether or not pterosaurs had that feather-like fiber covering all over their body, or if the feather fossils I guess you could say that we're finding are scattered feather fibers from just the wing membranes, and that they didn't have feathers all over their body.
Mm,
Obviously, that's kind of the alternative hypothesis to our current paradigm, so it's not necessarily to be taken at face value. But it brings up a somewhat interesting point, and our understanding of what we think is correct changes pretty constantly. So we definitely assume for now that pterosaurs had feathers because it seems to be the most likely option. But maybe tomorrow we find a fossil with no feathers, and we'll have to start considering things. So definitely the subject of pterosaurs specifically is like, well, we have to leave the door a tiny bit ajar just because we do have some questions that aren't exactly fully answered yet.
right. I have one more reported sighting that Whitcomb received. So after he finished interviewing 3 of the 7 boys, or now grown men, that were there that day at Lake Pung, I think that was the last day of his investigation. So he was leaving and waiting for a vehicle to arrive. And they were approached by a man named Jonah Jim.
Jonah Jim.
Oh,
I love
yeah.
that. I love
That's
the
a
name.
movie series like in the works, Jonah Jim.
Jonah Jim.
Jonah Jim and the Search of the Pterosaur in Papua New Guinea.
The Curse of the Ropen.
Yeah.
Dude, yeah, Jonah Jim and the Curse of the Ropen. Whoa. We just created the next Indiana Jones.
We did. Call
Um,
Chris Pratt right now.
And shoot him. 'Cause he ain't playing Indiana Jones.
I think Alex and I feel pretty strongly about that.
He's playing Indiana Jones. He'll be playing. I forgot the name already. Actually, what was it again?
Jonah Jim?
Jonah Jim. There we go.
Jonah Jim. Maybe.
Jonah Jim Jr.
Jonah Jim Jr.
Dude, that's the thing though. It's like the next Indiana Jones movie should not be Indiana Jones. They should do what they did with Rocky and Creed, you know? To where
That
it's
is a really good idea.
some new guy, but Harrison Ford's still Indiana Jones, and he's kind of passing on the torch to the next generation. That way, you don't anger anyone, but you can still make a bunch of money. See, why don't they just hire me? Anyways,
Call him Montana Slick.
Montana Slick? Oh my. So Jonah Jim says that during an outdoor family gathering one night, that he saw the Ropen not as a vague, distant light, but as a creature and close. He said that he saw a long tail in addition to the glow. Why is there's no details here? Oh my.
They got edited out for time.
Whitcomb is not helping his case here. He said that he did not take any notes, for his description resembled Gideon's. But later I would realize how important was Jonah Jim's testimony, and then does not share any further details. But I guess Jonah Jim also told them about a lady pilot who, many years earlier, had photographed a Ropen. And she took the photo while the creature was close to the plane she was flying, and that the photo is still possessed by Jonah Jim's father. But they, like I said, it was the last day of their investigation, so they didn't have time or the money to go to Jonah Jim's village, which was a different village than Gideon lived in. So, but I guess nobody's been back to go search out that photograph.
That is a shame. Maybe, well, I should say, hopefully,
We gotta
something
find.
does
We gotta
exist.
find Jonah Jim.
We gotta find Jonah Jim. Montana Slick in the search for Jonah Jim.
Yeah.
Yeah, but like I said, Jonathan Whitcomb has some adventures getting out of the Papua New Guinea area. It's kind of a funny story. Basically, he tries to get a boat back to Papua New Guinea because he's on Umboy Island, and he doesn't want to pay for the rates, so he gets some kind of shady guy, pays him like way less money, and then their boat breaks down, and another boat approaches from the distance, and it turns out it was the guy who uh, was who they approached for the first time, and they didn't want to pay his rates. Who fortunately saved them and didn't leave them out in like the middle of the ocean. But
You should have paid my rates as he drives by waving at the sinking boat.
oh, he charged him extra.
Yeah.
He did. I was like, dang, dude.
Oh, that's funny. That reminds me so much of we were talking about the Destination Truth episode, and there's this guide who they hired in their expedition named Max, who I don't know exactly what his problem was, but he was trying to lead them to where the Ropen supposedly lived in caves, and went way off the map. And when they asked him what was wrong, he was like, "The trees are smaller than they used to be here," which was a really interesting scene, obviously.
The trees are smaller?
Yeah, he said the trees were not like this before; they were huge. Not that they were missing, that they were smaller.
There's too much condensation and humidity in the jungle, and the trees are starting to shrink.
Maybe he was a little boy when he went there, and he just didn't realize how tall he got.
Yeah. Huh. Yeah. So there was another second expedition in 2004 that was led by Garth Guessman and David Wotzel. They interviewed missionary Jim Bloom again, and they got his sighting. So Bloom's own sighting occurred in 1996, and it's not particularly exciting by any means, but he saw on a jetty by a mangrove swamp a form, and it was a rhythmically pulsating light that was about 1.5 feet high and almost a foot wide, and that's it.
That's interesting because that's kind of a lone, just a light event.
He saw it was in a form as well, so
Oh, okay. Interesting.
there's a greater shape there, but I don't think he can make it out.
Mm-hmm.
Oh.
Was this at night, you said?
Yeah, at night, yeah. And I'm imagining there's some fog involved. I don't know. I picture it's very eerie scene in my brain, but
Well, of course, being Papua New Guinea, it's you basically flipped a coin as whether or not there's fog that day. It's a pretty high chance.
yeah.
It's a rainy environment. Yeah, that's an interesting report. I've never heard of that one. Huh.
Yeah, and here's also something interesting. During this second expedition, Guessman and Wotzel were informed that the Ropen carry giant clams inland. In fact, I said this name before. Seklo Bali is another name for a Ropen.
Right.
And so the people who told them that they carry giant clams inland told them that Ropen just means bird, like regular bird, like
Right.
any old bird you would see. They call the Ropen a Seklo Bali, which means one who carries its bed. And so Whitcomb was saying that perhaps from, up in the air, if you see something, basically a pterodactyl carrying a giant clam, it looks like it could be a bed or something. I'm not sure. I'm not really sure. Seems to be a strange thought process, but
Yeah, for sure. There definitely is a lot of Papua New Guinea that gets kind of weirdly lost in translation too. There's a specific dialect, and I forget what it's called, but it's actually heavily based on English.
it's
You probably know.
Talkpisin.
Yeah,
Talkpisin?
something like
Yeah.
that. And it's the one that I know is Glace belonging captain, which actually is directly from glasses that belong to the captain and refers to binoculars.
Oh, really?
So that's an interesting little phrase. So definitely there's this system of completely non-English and English derivative that try to refer to the same things. So maybe the words for clam and bed just happen to sound similar.
Could be. These same people said that they saw, or the same village said that the tail never bends except near where it connects to the body. Which is interesting because Whitcomb was saying that according to the mainstream scientists that we have discovered that at least a certain type of pterosaur could not bend its tail except for near its body. That it was just that it just stayed straight. It was a stiff tail.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
That's fascinating. Huh. It's always so interesting when reports that have no, what would you say, no knowledge of these discoveries in paleontology seem to really, it's what makes dinosaur cases compelling occasionally.
Mm-hmm.
Is when you
Yeah.
find a report that's like, there's no way they should have known that about dinosaurs or about flying reptiles in this case.
Or
Um,
even knowledge at the time.
Right. Even maybe the world didn't know at that point. And obviously maybe it's coincidence. And it's more likely to be empirically than not, but it's still such a little compelling piece of data right there.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting for sure. Yeah, but it seems like the Ropen, I guess from what I can gather, seems to hang out at lakes, rivers, things like that.
Graveyards.
Graveyards.
Graveyards. Maybe it's just Dr. Frankenstein. That's a
Maybe.
wacky plot right there. Dr. Frankenstein turned himself into a pterodactyl on Papua New Guinea, and now he has to dig up bodies so he can create himself a new body.
That's the plot of the Montana Slick movie.
Oh my.
Yeah, they get there and they're like, we're looking for they're expecting,
We're looking
a
for the
hidden
doctor.
temple, some jungle puzzles, and then they find Dr. Frankenstein.
Does he like have to fold his wings to like pick up little test tubes and things like that?
He's like sewn on human hands onto his like wings.
He has like gloves they just like stuffed with pebbles in the hopes that he can move it around.
I mentioned towards the beginning of the episode the island of New Britain.
Mm.
There are reports from the island of New Britain, and there are also reports from Australia.
Really?
Yeah, like I said, I wasn't gonna get anything from outside of Papua New Guinea. I guess I made an exception for New Britain, which I will share in a minute, but I'm not gonna share any from Australia because I didn't write any down. So
Next
sorry,
time.
folks. Ropen Part 2, here we come. In 1989, a witness by the name of Mr. M, which I am assuming is a pseudonym, and two American companions were visiting a medical mission on the island of New Britain. So they witnessed three creatures flying in direct sunlight, flying to the ocean, and they flew a half a mile in about a minute or two, and they were all single file, about a few hundred feet between each of them, and they flew about 300 feet above the eyewitnesses. And these are considerably smaller than the Ropen. They said that it was about 10 to 12 inches from bill to crest. And they also said that it had no feathers, and instead that their skin was leathery, oily, and had a dull shine to it. The wingspan was about 4 to 5 feet. Or, no. The wing length was 4 to 5 feet, with a total wingspan of 10 to 12 feet. And they said that the mouth was like a spoonbill bird. While the other two, one person, Mr. M, said it was like a spoonbill bird, and the other two described it as a crow beak.
Okay, right. Interesting.
Yeah, and then I think in 2006, Paul Nation returned to Papua New Guinea and got more footage of flying lights, which they had studied by, I think, like a missile defense analyst or something like that, if I can find it. Yeah, a missile defense physicist, Clifford Pava, who analyzed Paul Nation's footage, his next footage, and I guess basically it was like that it's legit.
Mm-hmm.
That these lights, there were several lights in the video, and that he concluded that the two lights are separate objects, and that they're not connected to the same thing. They're two different things.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Well, that's
Yeah.
two pieces of footage that's analyzed that.
Yeah, it's definitely. I'm not sure if this is the same. It might be different.
Yeah, I think we may be talking about the same piece of footage, but I can't quite tell. It looks like they're
I'll, I'll take
there's a similar
photos, or
orientation of the lights, it looks like. Yeah.
it does look the same. It could be the exact same footage we already talked about.
It might be,
Um,
yeah, because it was a professional who examined that footage and basically said the same thing. They're not connected, they're their own independent objects,
Mm-hmm.
and they're not connected to the ground.
yes.
Whoa.
Which, that's definitely um that doesn't then say therefore they're pterosaurs, obviously. But I think it does to some extent highly scientifically suggest, hey, we have something weird going on here. And maybe this has nothing to do with the Ropen story. Maybe this is a totally different thing that people have accidentally correlated to the Ropen stories. But it's certainly interesting that on an island where we have reports of these large, unidentified flying animals, we have what appear now to be these very seemingly legitimate cases of large, unidentified flying lights.
Mm-hmm.
Mm,
That you've had some video analyzed by experts. I'm like, well, it's not like a trickery, or it's not this or that. It's real lights. They're we don't know what it is, but it's not like bad CGI or something.
Right. It kind of circles all the way back to Evelyn Cheeseman. I don't know what they are. They're not fake. Whatever they
Mm-hmm.
are.
yeah.
So it's something weird's going on.
It's very interesting. But yeah, geez, that was what, 2006? I haven't really heard anything about the Ropen since.
No, that's a really great segue into like a sort of future of the subject sort of thing. There is one researcher who's living on New Guinea right now, Papua New Guinea, sorry, who's essentially, as far as I can see, doing research kind of 24/7 with these expeditions. I've mentioned him to you. His name is Rex Yapi, and
Oh,
he is very. It's so funny. I was checking these notifications that I was getting as we were doing this podcast, and he was posting things about his expedition for the Ropen, which it seems like he does one every 2 weeks or so because he lives there and he can kind of get out there. Um, he's encountering problems with getting into certain areas right now because apparently there's a bit of government restriction going on.
oh.
But yeah, I think he's kind of right now the last person on this.
Wow.
And you said he posts regularly?
On Facebook, yeah. Rex Yapi, something like that. Yapi.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, yeah. I think he's native. I'm not sure though. But
Dude,
yeah,
we're gonna have to find this man.
he seems like he's kind of the last guy on the Ropen right now because Whitcomb, I think he's getting up there in age, isn't he?
Whitcomb is getting up there in age. From the pictures in the book, homie was getting up there in age when he went there in 2004.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Right.
uh,
So he's probably going to drop off that radar soon enough because it's just not realistic for him much anymore, potentially. So we have Whitcomb and we have Rex Yappy, I think are kind of the two big names. Paul Nation, I'm not sure how old Paul Nation is.
I'm not sure. I don't even know how to find Paul Nation, to be
There's
honest.
not much info about him because even though he's done interviews, I think he's mostly kind of like the semi-anonymous eyewitness. Um, the only real evidence that we have so far for the fact that he even exists is his interviews and the footage that he put forward.
Right. Oh, and I should say, some of the video footage that he and Jonathan Whitcomb kind of combined forces using all this video footage to put together a documentary called Searching for Ropen.
Right.
And they were hoping that it would do well enough in sales to fund an expedition,
Mm.
but it bombed pretty
Ooh.
bad. And so I can't find this documentary anywhere.
No,
Um,
no, I never like that. Huh.
it's not, and I don't even think there's a DVD. Maybe I'll check eBay, but um, no, I can't find it. So I shot Jonathan David Whitcomb a friend request on Facebook,
Mm.
and I'm waiting to respond, if he hasn't declined it, I might shoot him a message anyways and
Mm.
just see, yo, you know,
Where's that documentary at?
where's that documentary? Show me the documentary.
Yeah, hopefully it still exists. That was that's one thing that has happened with a few documentaries in the field. There's one that I think came out in the early 2000s by this pretty controversial figure in the Bigfoot field, Tom Biscardi, called Bigfoot Lives. And I actually own one of the copies, and I think it was like the second to last copy that was online in circulation. So there's a few documentaries that are starting to drop off.
Mm-hmm. Becoming
Really?
collector's items.
Yeah, well, unfortunately, Search for Ropen might be one of those documentaries done.
Mm-hmm.
I know. You ever hear of Roy Mackle?
Yeah, yeah. Did he have a film?
He's made like a bunch of them actually,
Hmm.
and none of them are available anywhere.
Weird.
R.I.P. man.
Dang.
I know. So we gotta find these. We gotta track them down.
Yeah, that would be great to find something on these. I wonder if there's any forums that talk about the film, because if there's none of them in existence online, that must mean that people bought them.
Mm-hmm. There's got to be for some physical copies somewhere, maybe like in an attic somewhere, or
There has to be physical copies if they were ever going to sell them at all. I mean, for their profits to have been bad, they must have had.
They did. They
them-
sold a couple,
Yeah,
but
they must have made
that's what
a.
I'm
Yeah.
hoping, Whitcomb might have one still, and I'll be like, dude, I'll buy it off of you,
Mm.
whatever, if you want money for it, I'll give you money for it and send it to
make
me.
sure it's in that 4K though.
I doubt it.
Remastered.
Remastered, yeah.
Give me the Criterion Collection release.
With commentary by Montana Slick.
Yeah.
But I think that kind of wraps things up, right? Or
Yeah, I think so. That's about all that can be really said on the Ropen case.
Mm-hmm.
It definitely is one of those things that I'm glad that we got to talk about the things that we talked about, because as far as I can tell, no one knows that that nation footage got analyzed and by a professional, no less, who said, "Hey, I don't know what this is, but it's not fake."
Mm-hmm.
So that's pretty significant to the case, and not many people know about that paper.
yeah.
It's
Yeah, so I think we can say, at least I think I can say, that the Ropen doesn't seem to be a story invented by creationists.
Mm.
Uh,
Yeah, I would agree.
I think
Did they
that's a
add
little,
fuel to the fire? I'm sure they did. But
yeah.
this is an older story than that, it seems.
for sure, for sure.
Well, it's interesting too, as we bring it to a close. Whenever we look into like cryptids or any kind of phenomenon, you get there. There's been research or some info done. You're like, oh, okay, well, it could have been this or this kind of demystifies it. Whereas going through this, it just raises more and more questions each time.
Mm.
Dude, it does.
Yeah, and that's what a rabbit hole is. That's
Mm-hmm.
the Ropen hole.
So
Yeah.
that's it's just interesting to have something like this to where I'm like, yeah, I'm walking away with more questions than I had going into it, because there's just so many. Each factor just adds a new notch in the belt of the Ropen
Yeah,
story.
Dude,
right.
it's true. It's especially with a lot of the things we've been covering lately, Alex.
Mm-hmm.
We've been able to walk away and kind of be like, yeah, seems like it's all BS,
Yeah,
or
it's like the skyfish scenario.
the skyfish scenario. Yes. Uh, yeah, this is definitely not a skyfish scenario. That's so funny. Jose Escamilla, dude, can't get enough. Um, that's so weird. I just listened to that episode also, because I wanted I wanted to go back to our early episodes, and I listened to that one, and how we ragged on Jose Escamilla, and then Jasmine dropped the bomb on us that he had just died, and we were like, oh,
Oh my no. Oh no. That's
Well,
just an unfortunate scenario all around. We lost somebody and you accidentally made fun of them after we lost them.
well, to be
Wow.
fair, the man went out of his way to leave quite a legacy to guffaw at.
As long as you were being honest, I suppose.
oh, I mean, this
That
guy's
is,
evidence is more
I'm
than
sorry.
questionable.
He
It's
he he's shooting skyfish in heaven right now.
well, anyways, I guess we'll do our sign off, and I mean, I assume you guys know who Alex and I are. Otherwise,
yeah.
I would be wondering, how did you sign up for our Patreon? Um,
Who are you people?
How
But-
did you get here?
for Karac, how do we find you online? How do we join your Facebook group? You know,
Right. Well, most of the pages that I run are just called Crash Course Cryptozoology. That's the YouTube channel. That's the Facebook group. It's called Crash Course Cryptozoology Research and Education. I have a Twitter that's just CC Cryptozoology. It's not too popular right now, but I also run a blog called the Sasquatch Print Project, where I try to examine various alleged Sasquatch thermal ridge evidence pieces. And
Ooh.
I think that's just about all the media that I have out there right now.
yeah, yeah, and it's good stuff. You guys definitely
Yeah.
should check it out.
Good quality cryptid, content.
Yes, for sure. It's there's not a whole lot of good stuff out there, especially in terms of cryptozoology. So
It
it's a
can
lot
be
of-
rough going.
it's like the podcasts. My
Oh,
rant.
Yes.
You know, majority of it's just crap. Anyways,
Well, and on that bombshell, we thank you, Patreon people. We love ya. Good night.
Bye.
This podcast is a part of Straight Up Strange Productions. Discover more shows like this one at straightupstrange.com.